Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're trying to get the view from inside Beijing on the trade war with the US. We'll be looking at insights straight from Chinese state media and a top foreign policy advisor. All right, let's just dive right in with this really powerful statement that was all over Chinese media. It's citing President Xi Jinping, and it sets this incredibly defiant tone. It frames this whole thing not as just some simple dispute, but as a protracted war that Beijing is absolutely ready to fight. And get this, all of this is happening while a super critical summit between the two leaders is just hanging in the balance. Both sides are maneuvering, right? They're trying to build up as much leverage as they possibly can, which turns the whole lead up to the talks into its own strategic battle. I mean, the stakes for the global economy, they just couldn't be higher.
You see influential voices, like in this editorial from the Global Times, arguing that the US has fundamentally misjudged the entire situation. The message is pretty clear. Washington just totally underestimated Beijing's resolve and its ability to retaliate. They thought they'd just fold under pressure.
So how in the world did things get so heated? Well, to really understand Beijing's strategy, we've got to look at the story from their side of the table. And from their perspective, the US has been the aggressor from the very beginning. Wu Xinbo, who's an advisor to the Chinese Foreign Ministry, he basically lays out a timeline of what Beijing sees as just escalating American pressure. It's a sequence of events where China sees itself as simply reacting to US aggression, over and over again.
So, if you look at this timeline, it frames the whole conflict not as a single dispute, but as this continuous escalation that stretched across multiple US administrations. It starts with a tariff war, then it moves to a tech war, and now they see it as a full relaunch of sanctions. This history really helps explain why China feels like it has to fire back.
And a real flashpoint here is this September 29th new rule. What it did was expand the list of sanctioned Chinese tech companies, cutting off their access to even more American technology. Now, for this to happen so close to potential talks, well, Beijing saw it as a huge blow to good faith negotiations. It really made them question if the US was serious at all.
Okay, now let's switch gears and look at the actual tactics, because this isn't just about rhetoric. It's a strategic game of chess with both sides using some really powerful economic tools to try and get an edge.
And this slide really shows the main economic weapons in play. You've got the US using tariffs and sanctions, and then China is hitting back by controlling exports of rare earth minerals, which are essential for basically all modern electronics, from your smartphone to electric vehicles. And they're also halting purchases of US soybeans, which is a move aimed squarely at the American heartland.
But this brings up a huge question, doesn't it? With these really aggressive tactics like restricting rare earth exports, that could seriously disrupt global supply chains. Is there a risk that China's strategy could completely backfire and end up alienating other countries, not just the US?
Well, the advisor explains that these moves are a very calculated retaliation to what they call US pressure. The goal is twofold: force the US back to the negotiating table and send a clear warning to American allies to think twice before joining Washington's campaign. So, with all this tension and this intense strategic maneuvering, what would it actually take to de-escalate? What's the off-ramp here that could possibly lead to some kind of agreement?
The message we're getting from the Chinese advisor is completely unambiguous. The ball is in America's court. For any talks to move forward in a meaningful way, the US has to be the one to make the first move, to offer a real gesture of good faith.
So what does that look like? Well, China has basically laid out a clear three-step process. First, the US has to walk back those recent sanctions. Second, both sides have got to return to the spirit of past agreements. And third, the whole tariff issue needs to be resolved permanently.
And they're making it clear, this isn't about kicking the can down the road with another 90-day truce. The advisor stresses that businesses in both countries are just tired of all of the uncertainty. What they really need, what they're screaming for, is a final, clear decision that lets them actually plan for the future.
So all of this brings us to the ultimate question, right? The bottom line that really defines this entire negotiation. What happens if these conditions aren't met?
The answer from the Chinese advisor is totally unequivocal, and it reveals their final negotiating posture. It's a stance built on the idea that, yeah, a deal is preferred, but it is not something they are going to beg for.
This quote right here, it just encapsulates China's entire strategy. Negotiate from a position of strength. They are prepared for the worst-case scenario, and they are 100% ready to walk away if the terms aren't right.
So the key takeaway here isn't some desperate plea for talks. It's actually a declaration of self-reliance.
And this connects directly to China's bigger strategic goal, which is to reduce its economic dependence on the West to protect itself from future pressure. It's a signal that, sure, a deal is preferred, but it's not considered an absolute necessity at any cost.
And so that leaves us with the critical question, the one that's going to define the future of the world's most important economic relationship. In this high-stakes war of leverage, where both sides truly believe they're negotiating from a position of strength and are totally prepared for a breakdown in talks, who blinks first?